Every dinosaur you've ever seen in a museum was basically a ghost built from guesswork. Every color, every texture, every weird spike or frill existed only in artists' imaginations because fossils don't preserve soft tissue. Except now, we know that's not entirely true. Thanks to mummified skin and nanoscale pigment analysis, we can finally show you the exact appearance of 8 dinosaurs, and some of them look nothing like you'd expect. Armored and invisible. The best preserved dinosaur fossil ever found looks like it died 2 weeks ago. Before you dismiss that as hype, understand that when paleontologist Caleb Brown first saw specimen TMP2 011.033.0001, he called it the Mona Lisa of dinosaurs. Jacob Vinther said it looked like it might have been walking around recently. These aren't metaphors. This thing is preserved in 3 dimensions, with its armor plate still attached and its skin draped over the bones exactly as it was in life. The dinosaur is Borealopelta markmichelli, a 110 million year old nodosaur from Alberta, Canada. Mining machine operator Sean Funk hit it with an excavator in 2011. The front half of the animal survived perfectly. Technician Mark Mitchell spent over 7,000 hours across 6 years exposing it grain by grain. The species is named after him because preparing this fossil was basically a full-time job for half a decade. Here's where it gets weird. In 2017, researchers analyzed the preserved skin using mass spectroscopy and found organic compounds consistent with pheomelanin, the pigment that produces reddish-brown colors. The distribution wasn't random. The animal was darker on top and lighter underneath, a camouflage pattern called countershading. Every deer, every antelope, every prey animal uses it to flatten their appearance and blend into their environment. But Borealopelta weighed 1,300 kilograms and was covered in armor plates and spikes. This thing was a biological tank, and it needed to hide. The paper concluded that even a heavily armored herbivore required camouflage, which means the Cretaceous predators hunting it were terrifying enough that half a ton of body armor wasn't sufficient protection. The largest living animal with countershading is a gazelle at maybe 75 kilograms. Borealopelta was 17 times heavier and still needed to be invisible, but if you think a camouflage tank is strange, wait until you see the dinosaur that kept its belly button. The belly button. Psittacosaurus is the most completely reconstructed dinosaur in history. Not the most famous, not the biggest, but the one where we know exactly what it looked like down to details you wouldn't think could possibly fossilize, and I can prove it. Specimen SMFR 4970 sits in the Senckenberg Museum in Frankfurt, Germany. It's from the Jahal biota of China, dated to 130 million years ago. The fossil preserves near complete skin coverage showing thousands of individual scales, melanin pigmentation patterns you can see with your naked eye, bristle-like structures on the tail, and something nobody expected to ever find on a dinosaur. The breakthrough came in 2016 when Jacob Vinther and his team mapped the preserved melanin across the entire body using laser-stimulated fluorescence and cross-polarized light. They documented classic countershading, dark on top and light underneath, plus disruptive camouflage patterns on the legs and intense pigmentation on the face. Artist Bob Nichols then built a life-size 3D physical model incorporating the actual color data. When they placed it outdoors under different lighting conditions, the countershading worked best under diffuse forest light, meaning Psittacosaurus lived in dense canopy forests. Cool. But then paleontologists kept looking at this same specimen and finding things that shouldn't exist. In 2021, researchers described the first preserved cloacal vent of any non-avian dinosaur. The cloaca is the all-purpose opening used for reproduction, urination, and defecation. The outer margins were darkly pigmented, possibly for visual signaling like the colorful displays in baboons. It looked more like a crocodile's than a bird's. Then in 2022, Phil Bell identified a preserved umbilical scar, a dinosaur belly button, the oldest known in any fossil amnioti. Bell said it directly, "This Psittacosaurus specimen is probably the most important fossil we have for studying dinosaur skin." Here's the uncomfortable part. This fossil left China illegally in the 1990s during a wave of smuggling. Senckenberg Museum bought it in 2001 specifically to keep it available for science instead of letting it disappear into a private collection. The provenance is legally complicated, but the scientific value is undeniable. At least Psittacosaurus didn't move. Unlike the next dinosaur, which we can track across open terrain because we know exactly what it looked like hunting in full daylight. The bandit mask. Sinosauropteryx prima changed everything twice. First in 1996 1996 when it became the first feathered non-avian dinosaur ever discovered, proving that dinosaurs had feathers before anyone was ready to accept it. Then again in 2010 when it became one of the first dinosaurs to have its color scientifically determined. And the color revealed something nobody saw coming about where it actually lived. Chinese farmer Li Yumin found the first specimen near Siheitun village in Liaoning province. The name means Chinese reptilian wing, a deliberate echo of Archaeopteryx. The initial 2010 study in Nature identified two types of melanosomes in the feather filaments. Spherical phaeomelanosomes packed into dark bands produced reddish-brown color. An absence of melanosomes in light bands produced white. The result was an alternating chestnut and white striped tail like a red panda, but the 2017 follow-up study by Smithwick, Nichols, Cuthell, and Vinther went deeper. They analyzed 3 confirmed Sinosauropteryx specimens and found the banded tail, documented clear countershading with a dark upper body and white underside, and discovered a striking feature across the face, a dark stripe across the eyes, a bandit mask, exactly like a raccoon or a shrike. Here's where it gets complicated. The transition between dark and light on the body wasn't gradual, it was sharp and high on the flanks. When researchers compared this pattern against predicted optimal camouflage for different environments, it matched open, sunlit habitats, not dense forest, not swamps, bright, open terrain with direct sunlight. This contradicted the prevailing assumption that all Jahal biota animals lived in thick forests. Sinosauropteryx was built for hunting in full daylight on exposed ground. The stomach contents back this up. Preserved gut material shows it ate small mammals and lizards. This was an active, daytime predator about the size of a turkey, covered in ginger fuzz with a striped tail and a masked face, stalking prey across open Cretaceous floodplains 130 million years ago. One detail worth mentioning, the specific specimen used in the original 2010 color study IVPPV14202 was reclassified in 2025 as a different genus entirely, Dinosaurus sinensis. So technically the first dinosaur color ever determined belongs to Dinosaurus, not Sinosauropteryx. The 2017 study used actual Sinosauropteryx specimens, so the bandit mask and habitat conclusions still hold. If you think a masked predator is strange, the next dinosaur has something even more specific, a pixel by pixel color map of its entire body. The color map. Anchiornis huxleyi is a crow-sized dinosaur from the late Jurassic, approximately 160 million years ago, found in the Tiaojishan Formation of Liaoning, China. It holds the record for the most detailed color reconstruction of any extinct animal in history. Not an approximation, not an educated guess, but a literal pixel-by-pixel color map of its entire feathered body with statistical certainty approaching 90%. The landmark 2010 study in Science by Li Gao, Vinther, Shockey, Clark, Prum, and colleagues sampled 29 distinct points across a single specimen's body. They extracted preserved melanosomes, measured their shape, size, and density under scanning electron microscopy, and compared them statistically against a database of melanosome structures from modern birds. Each sample point returned a predicted color based on physical melanosome geometry, not guesswork. The resulting reconstruction revealed a striking animal. The body was mostly gray and black. The wing feathers were white tipped with bold black spangles, compared directly to a silver-spangled Hamburg chicken. The leg feathers showed the same pattern, and on the head sat a prominent rufous crest, a reddish-brown mohawk running front to back. Richard Prum described it perfectly. This was no crow or sparrow, but a creature with very notable plumage. Alright, this was the first full body color reconstruction of any Mesozoic dinosaur. Published just weeks after the Sinosauropteryx tail study, but the picture got richer. In 2017, Wong and Pittman published a laser-stimulated fluorescence study examining 9 Anchiornis specimens. The technique revealed preserved soft tissue outlines completely invisible under normal light. Drumstick-shaped legs, a slender tail, bird-like wings with a proboscideum, the skin fold at the front of the elbow important for flight control, scaly foot pads resembling modern chickens. Combined with the color data, Anchiornis became arguably the most completely reconstructed non-avian dinosaur ever found. We know its colors, its soft tissue contours, its wing structure, even its feet. Here's the complication. A second specimen analyzed in 2015 showed only gray-black pigment, no rufous crest. Whether this reflects individual variation, sexual dimorphism, age-related color change, or differences in methodology remains unresolved. With over 200 known Anchiornis specimens, the sample size exists to answer this question, but nobody's done the work yet. What remains undisputed is that this animal had a specific detailed color pattern that we can reconstruct with confidence. A 2025 study in Communications Biology even analyzed its wing morphology and molt strategies, revealing it shed feathers sequentially like modern flying birds. At least Anchiornis had color variety. The next dinosaur was one single color from head to tail, but that color did something no modern bird can quite replicate: glossy black. Microraptor is the first non-avian dinosaur proven to have iridescent plumage, not just black feathers, but feathers with a structural sheen that shifted colors depending on the angle of light, exactly like a crow or a grackle. And the evidence for this comes from examining fossilized feather structure at the nanoscale. The 2012 study in Science by Li, Gao, Clark, Shake, Vinther, Narell, and colleagues examined specimen BMNH CPH881, a microraptor from the early Cretaceous of Liaoning, China, dated to approximately 125 to 120 million years ago. Under electron microscopy, the preserved melanosomes showed a distinctive characteristic. They were narrow and arranged in stacked layered sheets within the feather barbules. This specific nanostructural arrangement is what produces iridescence in modern birds. The researchers ran statistical comparisons against a database of melanosome structures from living birds. The results returned a 58 to 100% probability of iridescent or black coloration across every sampled body region. The conclusion was definitive. Microraptor was predominantly glossy, iridescent black with a blue-black sheen, like a living crow scaled down to the size of a large pigeon. This finding immediately killed an earlier hypothesis. Previous studies had suggested Microraptor was nocturnal based on scleral ring analysis showing large eye size, but no living bird with iridescent plumage is nocturnal. Iridescence only functions as a visual signal in daylight. The color evidence overturned the nocturnal interpretation entirely. Microraptor was a daytime animal using its shimmering plumage for display. Likely sexual selection? The same specimen resolved another debate. Earlier reconstructions showed Microraptor with a broad diamond-shaped tail fan like a kite. BMNH-CPH881 revealed a narrower fan with ornamental streamer feathers projecting from the center, more like a decorative pennant than a functional flight surface, right? Combined with asymmetric flight feathers on all four limbs, the anatomy suggested a small, glossy, four-winged creature that glided between trees. Microraptor is the most abundantly preserved non-avian raptor dinosaur with over 300 known specimens. It ranged from 42 to 83 centimeters long and weighed as little as half a kilogram. Stomach contents preserved across multiple specimens show it ate fish, lizards, small mammals, and even other birds. This was an arboreal gliding predator with a diverse diet and flashy plumage. The discovery history is worth mentioning. The first Microraptor specimen was part of the infamous 1999 Archaeoraptor hoax, a chimeric fossil smuggled from China that combined a Microraptor body with a different dinosaur skull and was prematurely published in National Geographic before paleontologist Zhu Xing exposed the fraud. Once separated and properly described, Microraptor became one of the most important feathered dinosaur discoveries ever made. At least Microraptor's four wings and iridescent feathers came from exceptional fossil preservation. The next dinosaur has no feathers preserved at all, but we know exactly what its skin looked like because the skin itself turned into rock. The mummies. Edmontosaurus has the longest and richest history of soft tissue preservation of any dinosaur. The first dinosaur mummy ever found was an Edmontosaurus specimen discovered in 1908 by Charles Sternberg and his sons near Lusk, Wyoming, coined the term, quote, two when he described it in 1912. Gregory S. Paul later wrote that the life appearance of Edmontosaurus can be more accurately restored than that of any other dinosaur. That claim keeps getting stronger with every new discovery. The Dakota mummy, specimen NDGS 2000, was found in 1999 by Tyler Lyson, then a high school student on his family's North Dakota ranch. It preserved extensive three-dimensional skin patches, horny hoof sheaths, and a row of tail spikes. A 2015 study detected melanin pigments in the skin, though full-color reconstruction wasn't possible. Then in 2022, researchers made a startling taphonomic discovery. Bite marks from at least two large scavengers, including an ancient crocodilian, punctured Dakota's skin. skin. And this scavenging likely aided preservation by allowing gases to escape and promoting desiccation, challenging the assumption that mummies require rapid burial under exceptional conditions. The biggest breakthrough came in October 2025 when Paul Sereno and colleagues published a landmark study in Science describing two new Edmontosaurus mummies from Wyoming, an adult nicknamed Ed Sr. and a juvenile called Ed Jr., the only juvenile dinosaur mummy ever found. The study revealed something nobody expected: the mummy skin isn't preserved organic tissue at all. It's a sub-millimeter thick clay template formed by microbial biofilms on the decaying carcass surface. Despite being inorganic, this clay captured extraordinary detail: a fleshy midline crest running along the neck and trunk, a row of interdigitating spikes over the hips and tail, wedge-shaped hooves on the hind feet, the earliest documented hooves in any land vertebrate, and the first in any reptile. The skin showed small pebble-like scales 1 to 4 millimeters across and wrinkled texture over the ribcage. A separate 2013 study by Phil Bell had already documented a soft tissue rooster-like comb on the head of a related species, Edmontosaurus regalis, a feature completely invisible in the skeleton. Bell called it equivalent to discovering for the first time that elephants had trunks. These mummy specimens collectively show that Edmontosaurus had small scales, wrinkled skin, a fleshy midline crest, a spike-lined tail, and hooved feet, features that are invisible in skeletal reconstructions alone. Multiple Edmontosaurus mummies exist across different institutions. AMNH 5060 at the American Museum of Natural History, Dakota at the North Dakota Geological Survey, Ed Sr. and Ed Jr. in Wyoming collections. Each one adds new details. Gregory Paul's claim that Edmontosaurus can be more accurately restored than any other dinosaur isn't hype. It's documented fact spanning over a century of discoveries. At least Edmontosaurus mummies preserve body contours and soft tissue features. The next dinosaur has no mummies, no color data, and no soft tissue preservation at all. But we know exactly what its skin looked like because researchers found the skin itself still attached to the bones. The king's skin? Tyrannosaurus rex is the most famous dinosaur in the world, and while no T-Rex has been found mummified or color preserved, a series of studies since 2017 has sharply narrowed down what it actually looked like. And some of the answers overturned assumptions that had persisted for decades. The feather question was largely settled by Bell and colleagues in 2017 in Biology Letters. They examined fossilized skin from the neck, pelvis, and tail of specimen HMNS 2006.1743.01, nicknamed Yrex, alongside skin impressions from 4 other large tyrannosaurids. Every single sample showed small, pebbly, non-overlapping scales approximately 1 millimeter in diameter, arranged in trapezoidal clusters separated by deeply inscribed interstitial skin, and 0 feathers anywhere. The authors concluded that extensive feather coverings seen in earlier smaller tyrannosaurids were lost as the lineage evolved toward gigantism. The current consensus holds that adult T-Rex was predominantly scaly, though juveniles may have retained downy filaments for insulation the way elephant calves have more hair. Limited feathering on unsampled regions like the dorsal midline cannot be ruled out, but the evidence points to a mostly naked animal. Here's the complication. Yutyrannus wally, a large feathered tyrannosaur described by Shusheng in 2012, measured approximately 9 meters long, weighed 1,400 kilograms, and had filaments up to 20 centimeters long covering its body. This proves feathers existed in the Tyrannosauroid lineage, but T-Rex, living 60 million years later and weighing 6 times more, appears to have largely shed them. The lips debate was addressed by Cullen and colleagues in 2023 in Science, drawing on 4 independent lines of evidence. Tooth-to-skull proportions matched lipped lizards rather than lipless crocodiles. Enamel wear patterns on Daspletosaurus teeth were consistent with hydrated lip-covered teeth. Skull bone foramina, the nerve and blood vessel holes, resembled lipped lizards rather than crocodilian pressure sensor pores, and slow tooth replacement rates, approximately 2 years per tooth, suggested protective lip covering. The conclusion was definitive. T-Rex most likely had scaly, non-muscular lips covering its teeth when its mouth was closed. More Komodo dragon than crocodile. The famous specimens provide the skeletal framework. Sue, specimen FMNHPR 2081 is approximately 90% complete and lives at the Field Museum in Chicago. Stan, specimen BHI 3033, has the best preserved skull and now resides at the Natural History Museum Abu Dhabi after selling for $31.8 million in 2020. Scotty, specimen RSMP 2523.8, is the largest known individual at an estimated 8,870 kilograms. These skeletons tell us about size, posture, and proportions. The skin studies and lips analysis paint the actual living picture. A scaly, lip-covered, horizontally postured giant with binocular vision, powerful olfaction, and tiny two-fingered arms. Color remains unknown. No melanosomes have been recovered from any T-Rex specimen, and none likely ever will given the coarse preservation environment of the Hell Creek Formation where they're found. At least T-Rex has direct skin evidence and osteological indicators like skull foramina. The final dinosaur on this list has even less soft tissue preservation, but we know it had feathers because of tiny bumps on its arm bones that shouldn't be there. The feathered poodle, the gap between the real Velociraptor and the Jurassic Park version is arguably the widest of any dinosaur in popular culture. The actual animal was about the size of a miniature poodle, roughly 0.5 meters tall at the hip, 1.5 to 2 meters long, and 7 to 15 kilograms. Steve Brusate described it as about the size of a poodle, and not one of those big poodles, but a miniature poodle. Jurassic Park's raptors were actually based on Deinonychus antiropus. Author Michael Crichton consulted with its discoverer John Ostrom at Yale, but used Velociraptor because it sounded more dramatic. The definitive evidence for feathering came from Turner, Makovicki, and Norell in 2007 in Science. They identified 6 evenly spaced quill knobs on the ulna, the forearm bone, of specimen IGM 100/981, a Velociraptor right arm unearthed in Mongolia in 1998. In modern birds, quill knobs are bony attachment points where secondary flight feathers anchor via follicular ligaments. Their presence on Velociraptor means it definitely had feathers. The spacing implies approximately 14 secondary feathers on each forearm. Mark Norell added the obvious conclusion: if animals like Velociraptor were alive today, our first impression would be that they were just very unusual looking birds. Here's the problem: no Velociraptor fossil has ever preserved actual feather impressions. The arid Mongolian sandstones where it's found are too coarse-grained to capture fine details like feathers, but the quill knobs constitute direct osteological proof, and phylogenetic bracketing seals the case. Every close relative with fine-grained preservation, Microraptor, Genuinelong, Sinornithosaurus, is extensively feathered. The 2015 discovery of Genuinlongsuni provided the most dramatic visual evidence. A large dromaeosaurid from China's Yixian Formation, described by Liu and Brusate in Scientific Reports, approximately 1.65 meters long, Genuinelong preserves large pennaceous wing feathers with an estimated 10 primaries and 20 secondaries, body filaments on the neck, and long van tail feathers. Brusate dubbed it a fluffy, feathered poodle from hell. Despite bird-like wings, it almost certainly couldn't fly. The arms were too short. Wings likely served display or brooding functions. As a close cousin of Velociraptor living 50 million years earlier, Genuinelong offers the best proxy for what Velociraptor actually looked like in life. Not a scaly reptilian predator, but something closer to a flightless predatory eagle. David Button of the Natural History Museum in London put it simply: quite useful to think of Velociraptor like a land eagle. The famous fighting dinosaur specimen, found in 1971 in Mongolia, preserves a Velociraptor locked in mortal combat with a Protoceratops. The raptor's sickle claw is embedded in the Protoceratops' throat, while the herbivore's beak clamps down on the Velociraptor's arm. They died together, likely buried by a collapsing sand dune mid-fight. It's one of the most spectacular fossils ever found, and it shows a tiny feathered predator taking on prey 3 times its size. We don't know what color Velociraptor was. No melanosomes have been recovered from any Mongolian dromaeosaurid, but we know it had feathers on its arms, likely covering much of its body, and we know it was small, fast, and capable of bringing down animals far larger than itself. Not the Jurassic Park monster, but something arguably stranger. A turkey-sized predatory bird with a sickle claw and the hunting instincts of a hawk. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.